Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Legality. I'm your host, Richard Hoeg, managing member of the Hoeg Law business law firm of Northville, Michigan. Today is a Saturday, but we're here doing a little bit of law because a big news story broke this morning and I want to talk to you all about it. So without further ado, I'm planning on putting together this video in the format of going back in the last 4 years, talking about why Dr. Disrespect, a popular Twitch streamer, was banned at the time, how that looked in 2020, then how it looked in 2022, where there was an update with a legal settlement, and then talking about what happened this morning, what I see happening, and leaving space for your questions and comments at the end of this video. So please do save those up. I know you have a lot of them. I've seen in my DMs and in other places a lot of good questions, and I've even got a tweet that someone put out that I think summarized a lot of them that we're going to go over as part of this video as well. So welcome. Thank you for being here, and thank you for supporting comments and commentary like this. I love to talk about the law and video games and gaming and pop culture in general. So if this is your first trip to Virtual Legality, thank you and welcome. And let's get started. So without further ado, let's talk about Dr. Disrespect. So Dr. Disrespect, the Twitch ban saga, is actually one of the longest running playlists on this channel. Not the biggest, that would go to Microsoft and Activision, which has just an oodle of videos, but the longest running. If you look at this first video from the playlist, and I will try to add this to the front page of the channel if I remember after the show is done, so you can catch up on all of these at your discretion. We see that Virtual Legality number 254 was the start of all this, and that it was 3 years ago, really 4 years ago at this point in time. And that continues on all the way up until today, it's June 22nd, 2024, and with the legal settlement happening 2 years ago from that point in time. So who is Dr. Disrespect? Why do we care? What is happening? If you don't know who Dr. Disrespect is, and I said this in the first video of this series, I'm not a big Twitch viewer. I'm not a big follower of game streams. I mostly play games and talk about them here in Virtual Legality and elsewhere. Dr. Disrespect is a very popular streamer who, in March of 2020, signed a massive deal with Twitch to be exclusive to the Twitch platform. And this was a big deal because Twitch was fighting with a lot of other streaming possibilities for big name Twitch streamers. So as the Hollywood Reporter puts it here, with more than 4 million followers on the Amazon-owned streaming platform, the Doc, whose real name is Guy Beam IV, is one of the world's most popular internet personalities, regularly streaming to more than 24,000 concurrent viewers. And I know we can get up there, guys. Let's have a 24,000 concurrent viewer Virtual Legality, right? As the battle to sign streaming talent to exclusive deals continues to heat up among various platforms, YouTube Gaming, Facebook Gaming, and Microsoft's Mixer, pour one out, have been poaching and cannibalizing streamers over the past few months. Stars like Beam have taken to announcing their intentions to stay on Twitch. And this was a big deal. This was a multi-year contract, and it was rumored to be in the multi-millions of dollars. This isn't reported directly, but you can see it's reported in the Hollywood Reporter. Why? Because Dr. Disrespect, Mr. Beam, was represented by CAA, a major talent agency. So when we talk about Dr. Disrespect, and we talk about what was happening in this contract dispute and what might have happened during 2020, 2022, and now 2024, we have to take it under the assumption that both Amazon and Dr. Disrespect, despite the name, are being represented by well-heeled and well-strategizing legal counsel, right? So when all of this happened in 2020, and by all of this, I mean, we're going to get there. First, Mixer goes under. As we can see in Windows Central here, Mixer is closing on June 22nd, 2020. How 4 years of unrealized potential saw an experimental live streaming startup become Microsoft's next service shutdown. And that, in less than a week later, results in Dr. Disrespect being banned from Twitch, doc statement, and what we know, which I'll shorten this particular article for you. We don't know anything as of June 2020. And one of the questions is, do we know anything now in June 2024? And I'll tell you why I think we know a little bit of something, but maybe not the whole story. Twitch abruptly banned celebrity streamer guy Dr. Disrespect Beam last night, leading to a day of speculation about what currently remain mysterious circumstances. At this point, it remains unclear why Twitch took the extraordinary step of abruptly banning one of its most popular, if most problematic streamers. Even in 2020, at this point, Dr. Disrespect had been banned once before from Twitch for doing a live stream from a public bathroom at E3. In the past, many have been critical of Twitch for not enforcing its rules against large streamers. And in fact, there is an entire series of Twitch videos that I've done talking about their terms of service, talking about how they treat various people on their service, whether it's Pokemon, and I never pronounced her name right, Amaranth, or any of the other folks that you might see. Those are all discussed on this channel if you're interested. But what was most important to me about this story in 2020 was that journalists and people with Twitter and everyone else was running rampant with speculation, right? This is a big deal guy. He had a CAA representative. He had signed a multi-year contract with Twitch, and they just snapped their fingers and got rid of him. And that was the story that people wanted me to talk about, and that's what that first video in this series talks about. Speculation has run rampant. In fact, we saw some tweets. Here's Rod Breslau at Slasher, who says he's been permanently banned from Twitch. And then I actually have these tweets from 4 years ago. For several hours now, I've been told from credible sources the reason Dr. Disrespect has been banned. However, due to the importance and sensitivity around the subject, I've refrained from going on it. I don't feel comfortable with it currently. And we can take a look at this as it happened. And one of the things that I said in that first video is that this is nice. This is good to see people out there talking about what they know from a journalistic perspective. But from the outside looking in, we can't really take much from this particular tweet, because of course it's important. It was a multi-million-dollar contract for many years that was terminated with a snap of the finger. So that's important. And it was likely to be sensitive with nobody talking about it for a period of time. So this didn't really say a whole lot, but we will see later on that Mr. Breslau comes back today and says, I wasn't lying, essentially. And he also commented on or liked or reposted the video, the tweet that was describing this video. So we'll hear from Rod again in just a bit. But Twitch, in response, said, as is our process, we take appropriate action when we have evidence that a streamer has acted in violation of our community guidelines or terms of service. These apply to all streamers, regardless of status or prominence in the community, which had me go through their terms of service and talk about what could be applicable here, what they could breach. Of course, Dr. Disrespect had a separate exclusive agreement with Twitch, so that wasn't the entire story, even when they made this statement. And Dr. Disrespect, in that same period of time, said, Twitch has not notified me on the specific reason behind their decision. And I talked to you all about the fact that while they might not have officially given him a notice compliant with his contract, it was clear that they had said something to why they were doing this, even if it wasn't legally something that he could say was actionable. Then fast forward to 2 years later, and we get the update that Dr. Disrespect and Twitch have settled their legal dispute. Or as it is put in this particular picture on Twitter, I have resolved my legal dispute with Twitch. No party admits to any wrongdoing. And as I said back then, and as I will say right now, this is language that is clear to me is vetted by legal counsel. This is settlement adjacent language. So when two parties have a dispute, and in this case, the dispute, we're going to get to why we think Twitch did what they did or what has been revealed this morning in just a minute. But when two parties have a dispute, they can choose not to go through the legal system or arbitration or whatever is going to be put forth in their contract, and instead just say, we're going to settle, we're going to release whatever claims we have against each other, and one side or another is going to pay money or do something for the other. And then as part of that settlement, you say neither side admits that they were wrong, right? Because the ordinary inference when one side pays the other money, which is what seems to have happened here, certainly Dr. Disrespect will say, and has said even today, that he was paid in full on his contract, is that that notion of being paid in full is going to be inferred by people to mean that Twitch was in the wrong. And so as part of any settlement, you have kind of a boilerplate bit of language that says both parties agree that neither admits that they were in the wrong and that they won't disparage one another on these particular points, or some language of that effect. And that appears to be what happened here. And I bring this up because I think this language is important to keep in mind when we talk about some of the things that Dr. Disrespect has said today. So, no party admits to any wrongdoing is standard settlement language. We're going to talk about that language in just a minute, but remember it. Keep it in mind as we go a little bit forward. And then again, that's where we left this playlist as of 2 years ago. Now, 2 years later, it's 2024. The sun is high in the sky. Everybody's happy. We have one other thing to talk about. Psst. Hey, you. Let's whisper. says Twitch, and perhaps they would prefer that their blog post didn't sound quite so incendiary with the news this morning, but we'll see. This is Twitch talking about a feature in their service, which is very similar to direct messages on Twitter or in other text services that you might have, which is essentially that you can pick somebody. It appears that I've disappeared. Hang on 1 second. All right, we'll see if I can bring my camera back up in a minute. Can you all hear me? Just want to make sure that I'm still being heard through my microphone here. Let me know in the chat. I apologize for the technical difficulties. These things always seem to happen live on stream. Very different quality. Is it better or worse? All right, that's worse. All right, let's see if I can bring this back online. Sorry about that, everybody. Thank you for bearing with me, everybody. Hopefully, you can hear me now. And if you took that minute to put a like down, I bless your soul because I wasn't saying anything for like a good couple of minutes. But hopefully, you can hear me. Hopefully, you can see me. Hopefully, this is all working now. I apologize for that. It is the technical world in which we live. And I'm not always great at hitting the right buttons in time at speed. So thank you for staying with me. Thank you for being here. And now let's talk a little bit about the whisper function on Twitch. So, psst, hey, you, let's whisper, says Twitch. And they probably wish they didn't have that particular heading for today. But this is a description blog post from 2015, as we can see here, of their whisper function, which is very similar to direct messaging on Twitter or wherever you might be familiar on social media. And it says, now you can send private chat messages without leaving your current chat. Whisper to friends, followers, and subscribers to chat privately one-on-one across all of Twitch. Your whisper will show up in line with the rest of chat on web and mobile apps, no matter what channel you're on. If you're watching Lyric and your friend is watching Man vs. Game, and apologies if I pronounced any of those people incorrectly, you can still whisper to him or her as long as you are both online, but only you and the user you're whispering to will be able to see the conversation. And it gives them instructions. This is actually a function that has apparently been removed from Twitch. Whether or not that's related to the story we're going to talk about in just a minute is a question. But there are some facts here. Can I block whispers from a user? Yes. Can I change my settings if I'm not allowed to whisper? Sure. Can I whisper to more than one user at a time? Yes. Can I do a group whisper? No. This is for one-on-one conversations only. So it's very similar to DMs, although you can group DMs on Twitter. And this is important because this is going to come up as part of this story. So what's important so far is the language from the settlement, which we talked about. I've resolved my legal dispute with Twitch. No party admits to any wrongdoing. And this whisper notion. And on that score, we get to the 2 years later, and we talk about what I have glibly described as a whisper campaign in the title to this video. And we see the Wikipedia entry for that. A whisper campaign is a method of persuasion in which damaging rumors or innuendo are spread about the target, which is really the reference that I wanted to make, while the source of the rumor seeks to avoid being detected while they are spread. That is not the case here, because this is an individual by name on Twitter that we're going to talk about who actually goes out this morning with the following. He got banned because he got caught sexting a minor in the then existing Twitch Whispers product. He was trying to meet up with her at TwitchCon. The powers that be could read in plain text. Case closed, gang, says Cody Connors, who, if we look at his description, is a member of Twitch or was a member of Twitch. The former CPM explainer, clicks per mil, how you get paid on Twitch. Currently woodbox with magnets in a band. As far as I can tell, a guitar player in a band. And I have a number of questions about this particular individual. I don't know them from Adam, of course. But if we looked at like the LinkedIn posts for Amazon, we have a Cody Connors. And maybe they have more than one Cody Connors, I suppose. But there's no indication in his post right now or in the timeline that I could see on his Twitter that he still works at Amazon. It only really talks about his band, music, and audio functionality for things like streaming. But however it looks, this has been reported on by a lot of folks as essentially someone inside Twitch, or that was formerly inside Twitch, finally talking about why Dr. Disrespect got banned. And I do want to note just a few things about this particular bit of commentary that I haven't seen discussed too often. One, the assumption is that Mr. Connors has seen these particular texts that Dr. Disrespect got caught putting out. I don't see that actually claimed in this particular message, and I think that's important. He says the powers that be could read in plain text. Most people have read that to mean that he's part of the powers that be, and maybe he was, but it's important to note that this doesn't actually say that. This doesn't say I put eyes on this. This says that I was in the inner circle, and there were rumors at the time of there essentially being an inner circle of people that Twitch was trying to keep it close to because something big was happening to Dr. Disrespect. There were rumors flying all over the place in 2020. And if he was in that inner circle, it's possible that he was told what they were worried about, but he might not have seen the primary source material. And this is important because there's a lot of things that can be said in DMs that maybe don't look great from the outside, but that maybe have some kind of, let's call it, a genteel understanding that somebody could read and it could look wrong, right? We've seen this in court cases on my friends' channels. We've seen this in various places throughout um, kind of litigation in public where people disagree on what a message or DM might say. We've seen this for a number of years now. And so one of the things I want to say about this is first, this has the ring of truth to me. And I'm speculating just as much as anybody else here. So take it with whatever grain of salt you want to apply. This story that Dr. Disrespect got in trouble for using the Twitch Whispers product to essentially DM in a manner that Twitch didn't approve of does make sense to me for what we know, which is that both sides went quiet. They were well represented. Dr. Disrespect hasn't gone public since with what was claimed against him, other than to say it was settled. And this is the kind of thing that Twitch wouldn't necessarily want to get out there from one of its major kind of representative figureheads. So with that said, this does have the ring of truth. It doesn't necessarily mean that Twitch is right? This is Cody Connors speaking about those powers that be. This is what he was told, or this is what he thinks happened. Case closed is not, in fact, the case, which we know because Twitch did settle here and didn't tell anybody that this had happened, which I've seen a lot of commentary about. Well, didn't Twitch have a responsibility to tell someone that this was happening if Dr. Disrespect had a pattern of this or was taking advantage of kids across the country? Obviously, we want to protect kids. But this is the reason why we have things like mandatory reporting laws. And your streaming platform is not a mandatory reporter for child crimes or anything else, as far as I know. I haven't seen a law that writes that in anywhere. So when we talk about mandatory reporting, that's why it's important for people that are really close to kids. That's legally, right? That's not morally, that's not ethically. And I've said it before on this channel, I'll say it again, which is that what is right may not be legal. What is legal may not be right. So if you want to say Twitch was hiding the ball here, and if they had this notion, they should have gone public with it. They should have told the police about it. They should have mentioned this to YouTube that is now currently platforming Dr. Disrespect. I'm not going to blame you for any of that. But I did want to point out that there can be a dispute about whether or not this, in fact, is the case. And certainly without any receipts, we can't judge for ourselves, right? We don't have the DMs in front of us. We don't know what was said. We just have somebody that was at Twitch that at bare minimum heard from the powers that be that this is what they were doing against Dr. Disrespect. He says no one made the wrong decision. Screw him and his boys, as it were, presumably his boys being his fans, which is not the best way to go out there with this type of messaging. But one thing I will say is that if you do think that this happened, and if you're sure of it, maybe you saw it in person, maybe Cody Connors is a part of that powers that be group, then I think you can make an argument that the wrong decision was made by not telling anybody, certainly. If you truly believe that this was happening, not going forward and telling anyone, not protecting others from what you think is a child predator, is the kind of thing that could be deemed a wrong decision by reasonable folks. And that's one of the reasons why we're going to talk about Twitch might not go public with this kind of information, right? This is not Twitch speaking. This is a former Twitch employee. And you see exactly why Twitch would have stayed silent, just like Dr. Disrespect would have, because a lot of this kind of damage falls on Twitch as an enterprise and not just Dr. Disrespect, because they hid it, as it were, if it happened, for 4+ years. We don't know when this would have occurred. We just know that Twitch discovered it, presumably pretty adjacent in time to the 2020 banning. So that's one of the first problems. One of the next problems we have, we can go forward a little bit here, is Dr. Disrespect. So Dr. Disrespect comes on and says, hey, Jake, seriously, I get it. It's a hot topic, but this has been settled. No wrongdoing was acknowledged, and they paid out the whole contract, right? Which we can see now, because I highlighted it, underlined it twice, is definitely a reference to what was approved for him to say back in 2022. And I've seen clients, I've interacted with folks that do this kind of thing all the time, which says, okay, that was vetted by legal counsel. I can use that same kind of language right here, and tries to kind of be a half lawyer and go out with a statement without vetting it through legal counsel. And so I look at this and say, okay, that's clearly a reference to the settlement. That's not terribly offensive. But so many other people will say that, see this on social media and say, no wrongdoing was acknowledged. That sounds a lot like, and I didn't admit anything, right? That's not, I didn't do anything. That's, I didn't admit anything. And most people are going to read it that way. They're going to read it rightly that way. but that doesn't appear to be the intent of the statement. And I even tweeted that out earlier this morning to say that's why half lawyers speak is perhaps the worst communication strategy. Either talk like a normal person or have a lawyer review, or of course, don't talk at all. But I'm limited in my characters on Twitter. The alternative is to sound like you are confirming a rumor, which I do think it sounds like, when you likely intend to just mirror the terms of your settlement. And that's how you get in trouble, right? This is one of the reasons why the first order of advice from lawyers is don't say anything, because you're not really thinking about the tone of how this is going to be perceived by the world. And yeah, I get it. There's rumors flying. People have just called you a sexual predator. But you have to really think about what you're going to say out there in public. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about was why Twitch might have an issue of their own, not just with everything we've mentioned with respect to them saving money, but with what is happening in this kind of claim, right? So Twitch, if we give it the full benefit of the doubt, has gone into the whispers of Dr. Disrespect and finds him to be soliciting a minor. Now, there's a couple of reasons that that's an issue. One of which is that people that are under 13 are not supposed to use Twitch. So we don't know the age of this particular claimant. But if it was under 13, this would be a COPPA violation. This is a collection of data of a child on the internet. And if you look at 2020, you know that the COPPA was big in the news. I have a whole series in my playlist talking about COPPA and YouTube. And Twitch isn't supposed to let those kids use their service. Now, obviously, they stream video games, so that they're probably not the best at keeping those kids off the service. But it is something to note when we talk about what's happening here is that if Twitch is allowing minors to communicate with these streamers, then Twitch could be looking at liability on their own of some kind, right? Like if you're general counsel for Twitch and you're having these conversations and you just found these whispers, that's one thing that you're going to be talking about with your client is, okay, so this happened and we're not a mandatory reporter. Do we want to go public with this? Because what's going to happen is we're going to say, we're taking you down, Dr. Disrespect. We're terminating your contract. Dr. Disrespect, well represented by CAA, says, no, that's millions of dollars in my pocket. I'm not going to just walk away and let you terminate my contract. So if you want to terminate me for a morals clause or anything else for a contract we can't see on the outside, we're going to have to take this to court. You're going to have to prove whatever your claims are. And part of that is going to be establishing that there are apparently minors on your platform communicating with your streamers, and you didn't really do a good enough job of keeping that under control. So that's one thing. The other thing is the notion of the whispers themselves, which is to say that if Twitch is reading Dr. Disrespect's whispers, that means that they could read them in, as described here, plain text from anyone, right? And that's something that people that are using Twitch may or may not know. So if this comes out, one of the things that Dr. Disrespect could say in his defense or to push towards settlement is, well, if we have to go public in a court case, then everybody's going to know that your executive bodies are reading their random whispers, and anybody else that might possibly have any kind of issue with you and can make their lives living hell like you've made mine, might decide not to use your service anymore. And Twitch is not the most profitable arm of Amazon, as it were. So that's the kind of thing that might be an effective argument as well. So we know that they've got a potential problem with minors on their platform. They've got a potential problem going live with this notion that they can just read what your private messages are, despite calling them private in a number of places. We don't have data protection that we would hope for. And I would always recommend people look at the platforms they're using and the messages that they're sending and understand that for the most part, these things are not encrypted and that the platform itself can, in general, read them. So just keep that in mind when you write things on the internet through whatever service you're doing. Here we have a TechCrunch article about Twitter having a secret encrypted messages feature that they hadn't quite launched yet. And then we have Elon Musk later saying that he was going to put forth unencrypted DMs, particular technology through Twitter. And I think this is an interesting conversation, but certainly it's one that was being had as early as 2018, certainly in 2020, definitely in 2022. And so it's a part of what could have been motivating them to settle and not talk about where this information came from because they don't want to have go public that they're reading everybody's private messages. Now, Dr. Disrespect eventually does put out a message that is a little bit stronger, maybe vetted, maybe not, but certainly a tack towards what you would expect somebody accused of this kind of thing to say later on in the day today. Listen, I'm obviously tied to legal obligations from the settlement with Twitch, meaning that there is probably a non-disparagement clause, what we would consider an NDA in common parlance for this settlement. But I just need to say what I can say, since this is the internet. I didn't do anything wrong. All of this has been probed and settled. Nothing illegal. No wrongdoing was found. And I was paid. Elden Ring Monday, which I presume means he's streaming Elden Ring on Monday and he's not just declaring it Elden Ring Monday like a federal holiday. But I think this is a better message than what was originally put forth. You don't have to believe him, of course, but I wanted to talk with you all about the fact that you can believe him and just still arrive at he doesn't believe he did anything wrong, and you can believe the Twitch leak and still have this place where there's a gray area where one side could believe they're in the right and the other side could also believe they're in the right, and that's predominantly where settlements happen, right? I'm talking to you about reasons why Twitch might want to settle at all, but settlements for the most part happen where both sides think that they're ultimately going to win if it came down to a case, combined with the potential liabilities of having information they don't want exposed in that same kind of public outing. So we're at a place in this discussion where we've got a Dr. Disrespect who says he didn't do anything wrong. All this has been probed and settled. And we're trying to figure out why Twitch would have done that. We get back to the Cody Connors tweet here. And then I think I just wanted to flag for people a couple of things. One, in my last video, I had talked about the fact that I was going to take down my player and Patreons because I wasn't making enough videos and I didn't feel like I was getting enough content to the people that were supporting this channel. First of all, I want to say that I am very appreciative of all the support they have put forth. But after a number of comments and messages from people, I am going to keep those support channels open. So if you do like this kind of commentary, if you want to have these kind of conversations, please do let me know. And please do support the channel with membership, super chats, comments, questions, likes, subscribes, player and Patreon, the best ways to support it separate from YouTube. And if anybody from the past year and a half since my stroke wants to talk about what they think they should have gotten in terms of reference or otherwise from the channel, and then they feel that they didn't, please do DM me in unencrypted fashion that could be read by Elon Musk, or email me and let me know, and I will definitely make it right. That is what I want to do. I want to allow people to support the channel if they want to, and I want to make sure that everybody gets what they think that they were owed from that support. So I am happy to make that happen. All right. Or, as I like to say, just subscribe. Tell your friends. We love to have these conversations here. So now, as promised, let's talk about some questions and some comments. I know you have them. I have a lot of thoughts on this, obviously. And we're going to start with a set of questions that I really liked from Hunter on Twitter. Why would Twitch have settled and paid out his contract if they had proof of wrongdoing? And one thing I would say there is that proof of wrongdoing is not as crystal clear as you might think it is, right? It's not just a very specific thing. If we look at the California Penal Code, which I'm using California as the reference point here because the Twitch terms of service are under California law, but that doesn't mean that that would be the law that applies here. There's a whole lot of facts and specifics that both counsels would have to consider about where he was and where the person that was being texted to was. That under California law, every person who's motivated by an unnatural or abnormal sexual interest in children, who arranges a meeting with that minor or person he or she believes to be a minor, to give you the Chris Hansens of the world, right, for the purpose of exposing his or her bathing suit areas, having the child expose his or her bathing suit areas, or engaging in lewd or lascivious behavior, shall be punished by a fine or by imprisonment in a county jail not exceeding 1 year. And every person described in paragraph 1 that actually goes to the arranged meeting place at or about the arranged time shall be imprisoned by imprisonment in state prison for 2, 3, or 4 years. So I've highlighted some of the language here that you can really get into a fight about. But you can imagine a set of messages that a reasonable person could look at and say, oh, that's clearly beyond the pale. That is unnatural or abnormal, clearly for the purpose of engaging in lewd or lascivious behavior. And Dr. Disrespect says, well, this is for millions of dollars. This was a fan I was trying to be polite to, and the language in the message is being misconstrued. And clearly, what we do know is that it's not obvious enough that Twitch could just say, all right, let's go to court over it, if they didn't have a problem with the other things that we've talked about with respect to COPPA and reading of whispers. If they did, that's a whole other ball of wax. But you can see in this bit of language that it's going to be a controversial kind of fight, especially when millions of dollars are on the line. And so we don't know without the messages what was actually being said to this person. We don't know what the relationship was. We also have to put it in context with that mixer destruction, right? Which is to say, we knew at the time that Twitch had entered into very expensive contracts with exclusive streamers. Those contracts did not appear to be moving the needle for the popularity of the Twitch service. And further, that their primary competitor to those contracts, which would have driven up the price they had to pay for their talent, had just disintegrated next to them. So we posited at the time that whether or not Twitch actually did this, they certainly had an incentive to go and try to examine all of the very expensive contracts they had recently entered into to see if there was a way that they could terminate them. So with Twitch already focused on that, you can see how this kind of conflagration develops, but you don't get to a place where Twitch is definitely in the right and Dr. Disrespect is definitely in the wrong, certainly without being able to evaluate those messages ourselves. Similarly, just talking about the mandatory reporting aspect of this, I did want to point out this is an information bulletin from the Division of Law Enforcement in California from 2020, talking about when you have to report problems for kids. I'm going to shorten this a little bit. And you have to have a reasonable suspicion that there is a potential for abuse, et cetera, et cetera. And you're a mandated reporter if you're a coach, an assistant coach, a teacher, an instructional aide, an administrator of a day camp, administrator of an employee or youth recreation program, or an administrative board member or employee of a public or private organization whose duties require direct contact and supervision of children. In fact, Twitch is the opposite of that. They are supposed to not allow children to even use their service at all. So morally and ethically, we can absolutely sit in judgment of Twitch deciding not to talk about any of this. But legally, this is not the kind of thing that they would have to go forward and tell anybody about. So from a legal liability perspective, you can see how Twitch might arrive at the decision to not do so. And you don't have to like that. I don't like that. That feels bad to me. But when we talk about that, I think that is important. The other aspect of this is that if the child was under the age of 13, let's pretend that they just didn't have the necessary mechanisms to keep those kids out. They now are collecting that data, that information of the DMs of that child, and then they're holding them to get out of the Dr. Disrespect contract. A motivated attorney on Dr. Disrespect's side could point out that by their own policy and COPPA compliance, if Twitch learns that personal information of persons under 13 has been collected on or through the Twitch services, Twitch will take the appropriate steps to delete this information. They're not allowed to use it, right? They weren't supposed to collect it in the first place under the law. They aren't allowed to use it for any reason, which is all to say there are a number of circumstances that we don't know, we don't understand about what happened in this particular story that could be used as leverage by Dr. Disrespect to ensure that he gets to settlement. And you don't have to like that. I don't love that particular version of events either. But this is how these things happen. It's important to understand the legal process is not designed to ensure a perfect society. It isn't designed to make sure everybody is as maximally protected as possible. In this particular case, a civil dispute under contract terms, it's designed to make sure that both sides get what they had agreed to in that contract. And you can think that the laws are written poorly for that purpose. And maybe you're right. Maybe they should incorporate a certain reporting aspect of social media now in the 21st century. I can't speak to that. That's a policy question, but it is not mandated for Twitch right now. And it's certainly understandable from the corporate law side of things how it would have gotten to a place where Twitch would potentially want to settle if any or more of these things kind of flipped. As for the next question, if they didn't admit wrongdoing, why? would they have been liable for something, or did they think it would hurt the reputation? This is standard language in a settlement context, right? So if you imagine that Twitch is paying out the rest of the contract, which is what Dr. Disrespect has said, and we have no reason to believe that's not the case because Twitch could have easily said that isn't what happened. So Dr. Disrespect gets paid immediately. They are saying that we are not responsible for a breach. We didn't maliciously breach. He's releasing them of all of the other kind of laws that he could potentially claim against them, just like they're releasing him of anything that they had potentially able to bring against him. So you have a mutual release of claims. You both don't admit to doing anything wrong. And in exchange, we're going to pay out the rest of your contract, and we're never going to talk about this again. Unless one of our employees decides, as part of his Rock Band initiative, to tweet out something in 2 years from now. And that's not our problem. Maybe. We'll see if any lawsuits develop from here. But would they have been liable for something? They're worried about being liable for breach of contract and malicious breach, if he wants to bring that. How would Doc have managed to get them to not release anything and pay him out all the way in court? We talked about that as part of this video, right? Which is to say, if we imagine that there was a conversation, and it does, like I said, have the ring of truth to me, that there was a conversation between somebody that probably looked bad to someone that maybe had an innocent explanation, maybe didn't, but that there was a conversation and there was a dispute about whether or not that conversation rose to the level of violating his contract. Then if you have that dispute, you don't want all the rest of this to go public. You don't want to have a conversation where one of your representative pieces of talent is having these communications at all, that you didn't do anything about it, and that you're reading people's whispers in order to figure out what is happening on your service. And then if you delay that, if you're Dr. Disrespect's team and you delay it long enough, multiple months, years, until the settlement actually happens, then Dr. Disrespect's leverage actually goes up in that context, because now you've made Twitch look like they're hiding something, right? One of the reasons why this is a big story today is not just because of Dr. Disrespect, but because Twitch looks bad as part of all this. That's why all these questions at the top are about Twitch. Why did this random ex-employee know the details? And why was it held out for 4 years? If true, why now? So I think, as we said as part of this video, this random ex-employee isn't so random, and he actually doesn't really claim to know a lot of the details. He has the kind of specific broad brush whispers that you might hear around the office if you're working in the headquarters kind of notion. And that's why he's saying it now. Why is he saying it now? I don't know. I don't know what his purpose is to get that out there. It sounds like he's angry. So it sounds like he's responding to someone that was bugging him about Dr. Disrespect and Twitch. But I can't speak to the specifics there with any amount of certainty. Why did all these journos supposedly know this but not release info? Seems like a pretty serious situation to just not say anything about. So here I can definitely talk about this. We saw Rod earlier say he didn't feel comfortable talking about it. We saw other people say this is the kind of thing that they had heard through the grapevine from games journalists on social media today, but they all are liable for what they write about a person, right? So they can hear a story, and if they can't get some level of verification, they aren't willing to go out with it, because especially the ones at bigger outlets, they're liable for whatever amount of money that bigger outlet has in their coffers. And that's why their stuff has to go through legal in the first place, to make sure that they aren't wrongfully defaming anyone, or try to make sure they're not wrongfully defaming anyone, and keep the institution from getting sued to high heaven. As for the single people out there that are just kind of journalists without a big outlet behind them, I can't speak to that, except that good practice is, of course, to verify with multiple sources. And even right now, talking about this, we don't have the sources or backing necessary to give a pure news kind of understanding of the situation to an outside party. That's why I'm commenting and couching so many of my terms here, because we don't know what we don't know. Surely Cody has to have proof. Otherwise, this is an easy lawsuit for Doc. Or is that why he didn't directly mention the name? Well, we know that mentioning the name isn't specifically required, because everybody understood that this was about Dr. Disrespect, including me. As it was said, we talked about this with respect to Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. The Amber Heard op-ed in the Washington Post famously did not mention Johnny Depp, but it was easy enough for everybody to understand that's who she was talking about, and she wound up losing that defamation claim. So surely Cody has to have proof. I have news for you. Some people don't act on a fully rational basis. So he may have those texts, but if he never had access to them, he may just trust the people who told him the story. And so either way, it's not required that he have proof. He may be silly to go out with this news at this point in time and create such a kind of hurricane, but that doesn't mean that he has to have the proof. Otherwise, this is an easy lawsuit for Doc. Maybe, maybe not, right? Certainly the use of the term sexting is pretty aggressive for what even Twitch would have needed to show as a violation of his contract. And sexting a minor is probably pretty close to what we call defamation per se, which is to say you don't even have to prove that you were damaged by that because the damage is so obvious if you're accused of that kind of thing. But winning any kind of defamation lawsuit in America is tough, right? Dr. Disrespect, probably a public figure in terms of his level of fame. And so you have to show actual malice if you're going to win a defamation case against the person making the claim. And if Cody did in fact hear these things through the grapevine or put his eyes on the messages directly and believed them, in his opinion, to be sexting of a minor, then you're going to have a very high level of difficulty winning that defamation claim. And any lawyer for Dr. Disrespect is going to tell him he needs to be very careful about those kinds of lawsuits because the public tends to read them that if you lose that, the claim was verified. And so you have to make a lot of judgment calls there as to whether or not you want to fight it in that way. But certainly, predation of a minor is the kind of thing that you would expect a pretty strong reaction to if it was claimed against you. Would Twitch really let Doc call them purple snakes for years and act like they wronged him if this was the case? Yeah, depending on the terms of the contract, right? They're trying to put it behind them. As we have seen on the internet throughout its long life, actually responding to the trolls tends to feed them, right? So if Twitch thought the best thing was to stay silent and not to respond to every time Dr. Disrespect said something about them, then that was probably good advice. And would a grown-ass man really be using whispers on Twitch to do this? I think if he's a Twitch streamer, probably. And am I naive to think that that's whack? I don't know the precise legal definition of whack, but I do think that somebody in 2020 could be using a DM service to do those kinds of things, as much as I would prefer that not be the case as the father of two young girls. But I do think that this particular story matches up with what we know about the timeline, everybody staying quiet in the way that they did, and matches what I would assume got to a settlement here. It has the holes that I would expect on the Twitch side to not want to run it through a public trial or an arbitration even that could otherwise need to be enforced publicly. And so it does have that ring of truth to me. But I do think that reasonable minds probably can differ as to what was actually said in that conversation. And maybe tomorrow it'll all be leaked out and I'll be proven wrong and it'll be obvious as all heck that it's a bad thing. But I can't say that for right now. And I would caution everybody that's jumping on this particular tweet as indicative of the absolute verified truth as jumping ahead of the gun a little bit. So that being said, that's basically my response to all these questions. What all do you have in chat? Let me see if I can grab any. I haven't been following it very well as I made this video. So let me see if I can grab any of these things. First, Vintage Willow, thank you so much for gifting 5 Hoeg Law memberships. And thank you as well to Jeremy Morton for gifting 5 Hoeg Law memberships. I really appreciate that support, folks. And thank you so much. Now, I'll try to look for questions. So please use a Q or an @Hoeg Law to make sure I can see these. But otherwise, let me know if you have any thoughts, anything you've seen on social media or that you want to talk about. The journalists do have to watch the liability for their organizations. And then we will go on with the rest of our Saturday. Do people really think he would have gotten paid if they had something like that on him? We're talking millions of dollars. There's no shot. It's true. I hate to say it this way, but to talk about it from an economics, business, law kind of standpoint, it's a pure math problem, right? We could talk about the ethics and morality of if you think he's really this bad guy that you have some obligation to society to go protect it from a predator of some kind. But if they owe him a couple $1 million on the contract and they think he's going to make it difficult for them and he's going to keep this in the news for a number of years, just in the court case alone, and then he's going to bring up things like they're reading your private messages and they're not keeping any of it secure. And by the way, they are allowing, if not facilitating, kids to get on the service and use these direct messages to talk to their heroes, and that I know of a lot more people that are doing this kind of thing. You can imagine all of the kind of Chinatown badness that could exist at Twitch that Dr. Disrespect might have the bodies to show, right? Then I do think there's a world in which Twitch settles because this is way too much heat for them, and that they don't want to go through that entire process, and that this was done a little bit haphazardly in the first instance. We know it happened so fast, and that's one of the reasons why these things don't usually happen that fast, is that you go and you work out all the permutations of what can happen, where you're willing to hold the line, and it's clear that Twitch didn't do that here. Katie says, Hoeg, hey, people who act like this tend to repeat this behavior. Wouldn't we have heard about it again by now? I don't really know Dr. Disrespect. I know true crime. I can't promise you that we would. I can't promise you that if he did this bad thing, he isn't repeating it. Like, we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. We can't see into these people's lives. But whether or not he did repeat it, this is where we get into the question of whether Twitch had an obligation to tell anybody if this was in fact the reason why they terminated the contract. Renault V says, until I've seen any receipts whatsoever, I'm going to sit on the side of innocent until proven guilty. It's just too easy to say stuff, especially on the internet where accountability is severely reduced. And that's one of the reasons why I made virtual legality, is I did see people kind of jumping on things from a legal and business perspective in the gaming and other pop cultural communities that I thought could maybe use a little bit more context, right? I've talked to you all in virtual legality about the fact that I can't speak to what I don't know. I'm not in the room looking at these situations. I certainly haven't seen any messages to this effect from Dr. Disrespect or from Twitch, but I do have experience being in rooms like this, and hopefully that experience and expertise helps illuminate some of this stuff for folks like you. M. Davis says, Alana Pierce, game dev, on a quick podcast, speculated that part of the reason for Twitch going silent was to help protect the minor involved. Any thoughts as to the likelihood of this? Well, it's possible, although the court system, if it came down to it, should be protecting the names of minors. And certainly in California, you would expect it for anything like this. So it's a possibility, but that's very generous to Twitch. And maybe I'm being a little bit non-generous to them on this, but I do tend to see things from a corporate dollars and cents point of view. And I can certainly see how counsel or other advisors to Twitch would come out and say, you know, we don't want any of this to go public for reasons that relate to our bottom line, versus the minor. Now, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know whether they were under 13. We don't know what age they were, what jurisdiction they were in. We don't know if the communications were more benign than are suggested. We don't know any of that. Juanito says Twitch wouldn't hide a felony. They wouldn't protect people like Doc, Nick Merckx, and the others. I think that is another very generous kind of reading. We didn't see it as a felony, and this is one aspect that I wanted to talk about before. We looked through the California Penal Code really briefly, and we saw that the solicitation itself was more at the misdemeanor level, right? Like less than a year, a fine. One thing that might have happened is that Twitch jumped the gun a little bit, either didn't get the evidence that they needed, or by kind of interfering and preventing him from going to TwitchCon, you could say saved the minor, or you could say didn't allow the process to go forward far enough for them to actually have an actionable claim and to get into that felony level with Dr. Disrespect. Now, I want companies, I want institutions to be protecting our kids. But it's possible that if we give Twitch the full benefit of the doubt by acting when they did, with what is described in that tweet that we were looking at as he wanted to go to TwitchCon, presumably because he didn't go to TwitchCon and meet up with that child or minor, then they could have gotten into a place where they actually limited what would have been his legal exposure and potentially the exposure that he had for termination of his contract. So it's possible that Twitch actually acted in a way that limited their options from a legal perspective accidentally. A says, remember when Doc walked into a bathroom while real life streaming and it had kids inside? LMAO. I have not actually seen that stream. I know he was banned for, I think it was a week from Twitch for going into a bathroom. I think it was at E3 in 2019. I have not seen that particular video, so I don't know whether there were kids in there or not. All right. So I think that's all the questions for right now. I will continue to follow this story online on social media. My hope is that anybody that's been in this stream that has watched this video will share it around with people that are interested in this topic, and that also people will just understand that there are multiple ways to see even what we've been shown today. And unfortunately, that is going to be missed by a lot of people that comment on these things. So I don't think that the tweet itself is one that you can just take as sacrosanct. I don't think even Mr. Connors here is claiming to have direct proof of what he's saying. He has knowledge of what Twitch was looking at the time, which is important. That's a good data point for us, but it shouldn't be assumed that we know what happened. And all we do know from a data perspective is that Twitch and Dr. Disrespect did settle it in 2022. And Dr. Disrespect is trying to make the point pretty poorly early in the day, a little bit better later in the day, that the fact that they paid him should be taken as certain evidence of the strength of the two parties' positions when they were having this particular dispute. And I do think that that is a fair kind of request from the people that are following this to say Twitch did wind up paying him, but I did want to go over the reasons why I could see from the outside looking in as to why Twitch would pay him even if they thought they had him relatively dead to rights. So, Akaruki says an unfortunate side effect of consuming LawTube. Everything is now hearsay in my mind until I see receipts. I know it sounds like an unfortunate side effect, Akaruki, but I think it's actually good, right? I would frame that as critical thinking. I want people to look at what is being presented to them and say, okay, but do I actually have the foundational truth there? Or is there more that could happen? And everybody that speaks has their own agenda, has their own tilt, has their own biases, including me, right? So take everything I say with whatever grain of salt you want to apply to it. But Cody has some reason for going out with this information, has some tilt to the understanding that he has been presented, is certainly a little bit defensive about the actions that Twitch took back in 2020 and presumably in 2022. And so we have to take it with that understanding as we look at these kinds of things. Michael Mooney, what's the California definition of minor male or female? UK, that's between 16 and 18, with age dropped recently if gay. I honestly don't know, Michael. I didn't look at that portion of the California Penal Code. I would be willing to bet that minor for this purpose is 18, with some exceptions for people that are within range of each other. That tends to be how the states have drafted their language on these things, but I don't know. So I don't want to speak with expertise on that to you. So thank you for the question. Thank you so much for the super chat and the support for the channel. But yes, I think we're probably talking about somebody under the age of 18 or under the age of 16, as best as we understand it, from what Twitch has not said, what Mr. Connors has said. So, Oli Carivo says, bro, the story is so weird. All I know this morning was something about sexual advance to minors. Yeah, and that's really all anybody knows. But a lot of people have gone forward with this being a big break in the story. And I wanted to talk about it with you all because I don't think Dr. Disrespect helped himself when he went out with no wrongdoing was acknowledged, right? And I do think this was a situation where a non-lawyer was trying to use mirror language for what was already approved by his legal staff in 2022. And it got in the way of what he actually wanted to communicate, which he communicated later in the day, which is I didn't do anything wrong. So you don't have to believe him, of course. You leave Dr. Disrespect with the same grain of salt that you leave everybody else with in this story. But I think that's ultimately what happened is he made it a bigger story with this particular text. And when, of course, he didn't mean to. So Katie says, holy cow, that's more tabs than I've ever had. I usually have 10 to 15 open, but wow. Yeah, when I do a full virtual legality, I tend to use a lot of tabs. And part of the trick of doing videos nowadays is trying to remember the transitions and what I actually have set up to talk with you all about. So that's always an adventure for me as I go through these videos, but I appreciate you going on it with me. So thank you. What if instead of no wrongdoing was acknowledged, he used the language fully exonerated? Well, exoneration is the notion of a prosecutor at failing in his task of getting somebody convicted. So he wasn't exonerated. He entered into a settlement in which both sides agreed that no one was admitting to anything. So that doesn't mean that no wrong was done. it does mean that neither side admitted that they did anything wrong, which is different, right? That wrongdoing part does seem a bit sus, though, says Leo. I agree. I agree with the people that read it and said that seems a questionable bit of language. It sounds like I didn't admit anything in this context, not I didn't do anything. And I think it was a mistake to go out there with this language if I'm Dr. Disrespect. But this is the nature of being a lawyer, right? Clients do this kind of thing all the time. And you have to say, okay, now this is why we vet our messaging. This is why we talk about our contract provisions, because I know you thought this was something you could say because you said it in 2022 and it was okay in that context. But right now it sounds like you're admitting to doing this. And that's not really what you wanted to do. All right. Well, with that being said, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Virtual Legality. This was even a bit longer than I thought it would be today. So I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you guys hanging with me during our little technical difficulties where I was knocked off the internet for a minute there. So much appreciated. I will be back in Virtual Legality or in Hangouts and Headlines or what have you sooner rather than later, I hope. And if you're interested in seeing me again, I will be on the Bitcast talking about video games and hopefully slightly less important, less potentially dark stuff than this on the Bitcast on Seasoned Gaming and the Hoeg Law YouTube channel tomorrow. So please join us for that as well. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.
Virtual Legality is a YouTube video series with audio podcast versions presented as commentary and for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have legal questions about the topics discussed, please consult your own legal counsel.